Today is November 6th, 2007. Today we're meeting with Mr. Burley Vandergriff at his home in Colorado Springs. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer. Welcome, Burley.
Welcome.
Let's start out, if we could, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're born, your date of birth, maybe a little bit about your parents and your siblings, if you had any.
I was born and raised in the little town of Douglas, Kansas on the 5th of February 1931. That was the middle of the Depression.
Yeah. Do you remember much of the Depression?
Well, some of what mostly I gleaned from my folks. I remember their first house cost them $600. And my granddad gave my dad holy hell for he wasn't going to be able to make the house payments. House payments were $16.
What did your father do as a profession?
Well, at that time he was unemployed, but he would go up to the local Ford garage and change tires. And never mentioned it to the owner. He did that for a couple of years, and finally the owner said, "No, Tony, you keep coming out here and doing all this work. Do you want a job?" And I said, "Yes, sir."
He was doing all this for free?
For free. And so he worked for Gresham Ford Company, and one of his first jobs was going to Kansas City, picking up a new Ford and driving it back to Douglas. And later on, he was a staunch Democrat. And I think the reason for that was he was the Democratic senator from Kansas went to bat for him and got him a job as a rural mail carrier, civil service. I had a younger sister. She was a year and a half younger than me. She's died from breast cancer at the age of 49. Broke my folks' heart just to lose a child. Went to high school in Douglas. Was valedictorian of my senior class, all of 22 students. They went to University of Kansas. I was the went there with the idea of enrolling in Air Force ROTC and becoming a pilot.
Had you always wanted to be a pilot, or?
Always. I had model airplanes suspended from every ceiling in the house.
Is that right?
You know,
Can you tell us about your very first plane ride?
my very first plane ride was in pilot training, believe it or not.
Was it? Yeah. Well, maybe we're skipping ahead then. So we'll get to that. So you were at KU and you got into the ROTC program?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
That was a member of an organization called Arnold Air Society and Pershing Rifles. I received my commission in May 29th, 1952. May 29th was my dad's birthday.
Huh.
And he was proud as punch of me when he saw me his first time in uniform. After graduation, I went to work for Boeing Airplane Company near Wichita as a junior buyer, knowing full on that I was going to get called to active duty. The day finally came, which was a very, very happy day for me. And was to report to Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio. I went down there with stars in my eyes and promptly failed my flight physical. My eyesight wasn't up to par. Kind old flight surgeon said, son, if you really want to fly, you follow my instructions, I'll see that you pass your physical. And he gave me a series of eye exercises. I did that for a year, very faithfully, and passed the physical. In the meantime, they gave me a job as a military training officer for pre-flight cadets. And I had to serve as an upperclassman for these cadets that were going to go to pilot training, and I wasn't. I was the only tax officer in that whole squadron that was the Texas Aggie. And in the first class of pre-flight cadets, I had a young man by the name of Steele. And his dad happened to be the base commander. And Steele was sharp, so I selected him as to be my first student squadron commander. At that time, pre-flight cadets weren't allowed to drive automobiles. I don't know why, just a rule. I happened to see young Steele drive the general around on Thanksgiving Day. So that following Monday, I called him in and said, will you drive your father around as your father or as the commanding general? And I give the kid credit. He said, well, I guess I have to say, as my father. I said, you know what this means, Mr. Steele? He said, yes, sir. I said, take off your shoulder boards and take the stripes off. His mom just raised all kinds of hell. And his dad says, we're getting tough down there. Anyway, I finally got orders to flight school. And we moved to Moultrie, Georgia, Spence Air Base. Fine old southern town. If you said howdy to somebody, it took you 30 minutes to get away from them. there we checked out in the PA-18 for just a few hours before transitioning into the T6 Texan. I had an instructor by the name of A.J. Cribbs, and I ran into A.J. again several years later when a navigator, a backseater friend of mine, went to pilot training, and he had the same instructor. Dearly loved the town and the magnolia trees. Graduated third in my class. Next assignment was Bryan Air Force Base.
Can I stop you a second, back up, and have you described, you said you took your first flight at flight school. Was it everything you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, it was. I taxied into this PA-18, and I was going too fast, and that wing started dipping, and I was going over, and it scared the holy bejesus out of me. I thought, well, I'll just take it a little slower next time. But I had great fun. And being a bunch of hot rocks, we'd sneak out and do some formation flying. You know, if you kept each other in sight, you were formation flying. They had military check pilots, civilian instructors, but military check pilots that said yea or nay if you could continue with your training. Went from there to Bryan Air Force Base at College Station, Texas. Texas A&M again. There we flew the T-28 and the T-33. As far as I know, I was the only guy that, when I went up for my dollar ride, that's the initial indoctrination ride with your instructor, we came back and we had to dead stick it in because of engine failure. And the same thing happened to me on my first solo ride. Had to dead stick it. I thought the 28 was a marvelous instrument airplane. And I was fortunate enough to have Gus Grissom, who was a first lieutenant at the time, as my instructor.
Is that right?
And he became an astronaut.
Right, yeah, huh.
And he'd give check rides. I'd lead the second element, but he'd lead the first. And he'd scoot down to the back seat and open up a novel, paperback novel, and read. And then on his formation check, he said, "Okay, stack up." But it didn't take me long to learn that. To go be higher than he was, because he was going to be treetop level. I used to always kid him about going over to Officers Club and coming back to the BOQ with tire tracks on his hands where he got, because he's going back on his hands and knees. He's the only man I ever flew with that gave his position report. He gives a time over his whatever fix he was flying, altitude and everything, and then estimate St. Louis at 1, 2, and 15 seconds. He was that much of a stickler for accuracy. And he gave all the instrument checks too. He sealed in the upper part those curtains so I could watch the top of his head. And we were flying radio range. If he leaned out one side to see a station would go by, I'd kick it over that little bit that to the left or to the right if he was looking out the right side.
During that time, you mentioned those dead stick landings. What was that like? I mean, you were fairly new at flying. You felt like your training was sufficient enough to, obviously, that kicked in and it brought you in okay, or what was that? What was going through your head when that was all?
First of all, I didn't know what was happening because the instructor had to control the aircraft. But yeah, I always thought that I could handle any airplane that I ever flew. But it was a confidence builder too.
Sure.
I graduated third in my class at Spence, second in my class at Perrin. No, at Bryan. And from there, I went to Perrin Air Force Base for advanced and went through the IPIS, which was an instructor pilot, instrument pilot instructor school. Graduated top of the class there. And they were just starting the Air Force Academy. They said, hey, with your military training experience, you'd be perfect for the job. We'll send you to Denver. And I said, I think that I've heard a rumble about some classified orders for me. Let me find out what they are and I'll get back with you. It was an Operation Hot Rock, which was, do we rearm the Germans or don't we? And the tail going to Germany. And I thought, man, that beats being a training officer again. So I went aboard a troop ship, left out of Brooklyn. Took, as I recall, 11 days.
How was that for a landlocked Kansas boy out on the ship? Did you get your sea legs, or how did that work out for you? How was
you wouldn't believe. Crossing the Atlantic in January. It was January, and the seas were rough. Everything would slide to one side of the cabin and slide back the other way. And I got called on one night as to be officer of the deck. Well, big responsibility. Had all these GIs and defense on there. So I went up on deck. I properly fell down the ladder because it was raining so hard. And I got up and checked myself and nothing was broken. I said, well, I better watch my footing, so I put out my flashlight to see where I was going. And I hear this, turn out that light. I ignored it because I was officer of the day. Turn out that light. I said, I'm the officer of the day. He said, I'm captain of this ship. Turn out that goddamn light. We arrived in Germany at Bremen. And received quarters assigned to us in Augsburg, Germany, which was Bavaria. The first week or so we stayed at a hotel. Then we were assigned permanent quarters on the economy. About the only thing I can remember about those first days in Germany is, God, that they had the best damn beer in the world. Finally got a duty station assignment to Fürstenfeldbruck. We went to Firsty. And part of us were then divided to fill the same type of job in Landsberg, Germany. The only difference was the type of aircraft we were flying. And our job was to take World War II retread German pilots and teach them how to fly.
What year was this roughly?
That was 1954. Like Gallant, Schroeder, we had some multi-aces, you know, had 20, 60, 80, 100 kills. They had more time flat on their back in combat than I had total flying.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're supposed to teach them how to fly. We had those people for the first 3 classes. They were to become the cadre for the new Luftwaffe.
As former enemies, how was your interaction with each other? Was it?
Everybody fought on the Eastern Front. Nobody fought the Americans.
Gotcha.
Until they got to know you. Then they'd come clean
No.
with you. I had one of my first students, we were discussing ejection procedures. And I said, Hans, you're ejected from an airplane? He says, Yeah. I said, more than once? He said, yeah. I said, well, did you eject because of engine problems or because you were shot down? He said, oh, I was shot down 7 times. They just had stories that's unbelievable.
And they had been grounded since the war's end, and were
Yeah.
just okay.
A lot of them were pretty rusty, you know. I had one student who was held some kind of world's record for flying gliders. He was noted for, during parades, you could see but one end of the parade inverted, and he'd make a pass down the total length of the parade still inverted. He later killed himself, but doing it. That was one of my most memorable assignments. I had a student I wanted to take into the Link Trainer, and I got on the microphone outside of the trainer and said, are you about finished? I've got a student here. And this Louisiana drawl comes back and he says, I'll be out here in just a second. He got out and it was a German. And he'd been a POW in Louisiana. He had nothing but praise for it. He says, the Yanks shot me down and I broke my nose on my gun sight. He said they patched me up. They gave me a ride to Louisiana and I fell in love with the place. And he, to that day he spoke with a drawl.
Huh.
And he was one of them that invited me to go to Fasching, which is the Mardi Gras in Germany. I said, okay. What time you coming by? And he says, 4 o'clock, I'll pick you up. 4 o'clock came and heard his beep. He went out and he was out there in his Volkswagen and he says, looked at me, he says, is that all you're taking? I said, we're just going for the afternoon, aren't we? He said, no, we're going for a week. So I had to go in and pack a bag.
Was a lot of the country already rebuilt by the time you got over there, or could you still see a lot of effects of the war?
You saw some rebuilding. There was still a lot of rubble in some of the large cities. Some of the old cathedrals were just shells. But at that time, $1 you got 4.2 marks for $1, so we were living pretty damn high.
Yeah. And were you treated well by the civilians and such, or was there still any animosity?
Every once in a while you'd run into something. Not often.
Yeah.
One time they were using their own people as air traffic controllers also. And the guy says something to me in English, in German. And I said, I don't have to, that's German right command. Is it, what's it in English? He said, you're in Germany and you don't speak German? I said, buddy, who do you think won the damn war? Anyway, the aircraft we flew over there, we would give them about 3 hours in the L-18 just to see if they had the coordination still left. And then we put them in the Harvards, which is a Canadian-built T-6. They were brand new airplanes, very similar to the American T-6, except it had a donut-shaped stick on it, and it had heaters, which we didn't have in the old T-6, and it had aileron boosts, so it'd roll faster. We got a lot of time in that airplane. But jumping back a bit, for the first year we were there, they were still, do we rearm them or don't we? So we had a whole ramp full of brand new airplanes, no place to fly them. So our boss says, take them and go. Just let me know where you are every night. So I toured Europe.
Is that right? Yeah.
Everywhere. And North Africa and the Middle East. Every country in Europe. Come home, put a per diem voucher in, collect our money so we'd have some money to spend and go again.
Oh, wonderful. Huh.
Yeah. That lasted for a whole year.
Did you have to worry about the eastern flank, though, as far as getting into Soviet airspace and such?
They used to deliberately put up a beacon with a stronger frequency than our beacon we use for letdowns to lure you. And sometimes you go out there with some bad guys on your tail. Especially during stormy weather. The flying conditions in Germany were not all that good.
Right.
A lot of low ceilings and so forth.
Well, that must have been an exciting time for you. I mean, here's a Kansas boy that I don't imagine you traveled too far from home growing up, and here you're traveling all over Europe and Africa and.
Oh yeah, it was a good time. And everything was first class. The Germans gave us our flight suits, one summer weight on one winter grade. Same way with flying boots, one wool lined and the other. When we got ready to rotate home, they sent us home on TWA or might have been Pan American, Constellations,
Hmm.
with beds for the whole family.
So you were married, had a family at this time.
Yeah,
Okay.
had before I went over, my wife and I had a boy. We had a second son born in December of '53. And by the time we went, he was 6 weeks old, so it was legal for him to fly. And then we had a daughter born in Germany, in German hospital.
So you ended your first overseas assignment, and you said you flew back to the States.
Yeah.
Where'd you go from there then?
Malmstrom Air Force Base, Great Falls, Montana. And they sent me as a personnel officer. I was going to fly regardless of where they assigned me. The day we reported at that base, it was 40 below zero, and wind was blowing 40 knots. And I thought, who in the hell would put an Air Force base up here? We started pulling alert. There were many, many days we literally crawled out of the ops building to the alert hangars, crawled, because the wind would knock you over if you stood up.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's where I met Loretta. Got checked out in the, we were converting from the F-89Ds to F-89Js, which carried the Genie atomic rocket. And we were at Wendover one time. I can't remember if it was a tacky valve or a standing valve. We were just over checking National Guard's firing. And I asked my backseater, I said, have you ever fired all 104 of these rockets? The D carried 52 rockets in each pod on the outboard. He said, no, I haven't. I said, I haven't either. You want to try it? He says, think we'll get in any trouble? I says, hell, I don't know. Something happens, I'll say it was a mistake, you know. I said, lock on some ground clutter or something. He says, I've got a target. I said, okay, give me 20-second warning. He says, okay, 20 seconds. And I fired. All 104 of them, they just would just cover a football field.
Wow. Huh.
And I looked up and I thought, oh my God, there's a PIE moving truck down there. Hey, you know what, you always hear about the golden BB that was, well, thank God it wasn't a golden rocket. But I bet that son of a bitch didn't slow down till he reached California. What he was doing out in the middle of a restricted area, I have no idea. Unless he just thought he was going to take a shortcut. Nothing but desert out there.
How close were you from hitting him?
Well, you would think he had a magic truck going through those rocks because they were impacting all around him. And I asked my RO, I said, "Did you see that truck?" And he says, "Not until those rockets fired." I said, "I didn't either. We should have looked outside first." And we did our rocket firing down at Yuma, Arizona.
But you never did. Going back, you never did get in trouble for shooting those rockets?
No,
Oh, okay.
no. That's why I think it was. We must have been up there with the Guard, National Guard.
So,
Anyway, we did our rocket firing down at Yuma, Arizona. And my RO was a guy by the name of Don Johnson. And we were going to set a new record. And I've forgotten now what the range of that radar was supposed to be on that bird, but say it was 40 miles. Well, I told Don I wasn't going to break that record, so he called contact. Dead ahead at 44 miles. I said, "Don, you really got a contact?" He says, "No, but you said we're going to break the record." Then he says, "Judy," which means he's taking over, giving me commands now, not the ground. And I looked in the mirror and I said, "Where are you, Don?" And he's down underneath the radar set, trying to fix something that's gone wrong. So he says, "Just maintain the last setting I gave you." And finally we said, give lock on, I don't know, 28 miles or something. We weren't locked on. We didn't even have radar contact yet. So Don says, "I'm being happy." He says, "But it's not time for you to start your snap up." And the 89, we used a snap up tactic. Would at 20 seconds, you zeroed the pepper in a little tiny circle on the scope. As I pulled it up, that circle came, 20 seconds, shrunk, boom. And all this is being broadcast to the maintenance troops on the ground. Fierce competition between the maintenance crews too. So we land, and Don says, "How are we going to explain this?" whistle from the crew chief come over, and I says, "When you take that nadar can out of the nose, make sure you drop it on the ramp. That would destroy the images on it." So he did. As far as I know, we still hold a record down there for.
What was it like flying the F-89? Can you talk a little bit about that? What?
It was a reliable weapons platform. It didn't have, if it had bigger engines in it, we could have performed, but as it was, our max ceiling for interceptions was about around 35,000 feet. Because when you snapped up, you're bleeding off airspeed real quick, and you're in burner. But it held a hell of a bunch of Mexican whiskey coming back from deployment. Yeah, it was a good airplane, but I always said, if we built a runway that circled the Earth at the equator, Northrop would build an airplane to use up every damn inch of it to get off the ground. It was a good airplane. We went to William Tell, which was the worldwide rocket meet at Tyndall. And it was a week of drinking and flying. We had one guy got a little MG from some chick, and he comes in through the front door of the officers club, right up to the bar, driving an MG, and he says, "2 butts to go, please." And then the one got a motor scooter up on a diving board. I said, wait. Think this thing through. You're gonna run your watch, you're gonna run your contents of your billfold. Well, that's right. He took off his watch, took his billfold out, laid him on the diving board, vroom, vroom, and off he went. And then we had to drain the pool because of the gasoline and oil in it.
Well, was this somewhat of a Top Gun, a top pilots sort of competition?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And at that year, it was all F-89s. Later on became broken up to different airplanes, 102s, 100s. At Malmstrom, we gave our F-89s to Montana Air Guard. And I flew the first one over. Got photographs of me handing the paperwork over to the new squadron commander over there. Later that afternoon, I get a call from him. He says, "Did they give you the DFC for flying this thing over here?" I said, "No." He said, "This thing is in the worst shape of anything else." I said, "Man, that's the best airplane we've got." Anyway, we checked out into 101B. That was a bird. You could run both engines up to 100%. The brakes would hold, but the tires would rotate. And you get into that airplane, and you look down over the nose, and you know how long nose F-89 was. You look down at the ground. You turn the mirror down, and you got a Greyhound bus following you. That's how big that airplane was. And I went to St. Louis, McDonald, and to ferry one of the birds back. And they had us so scared of that airplane by showing us videos of pilots that get into a pitch up. That was an uncontrollable attitude that the aircraft would get into, and their heads were knocking against the sides of the canopy. I wasn't sure I wanted to fly that airplane or not, but anyway, we were bringing one back, and I called for landing instructions. And the tower comes back and says, "Follow the C-47. He just called inside base on you," which means he was turning a lot shorter pattern than I was. We had a few hours in that airplane before I had to transfer out. It was my turn to barrel, and they sent me to radar school. And man, that crushed me. We went back down to Tyndall. And going through radar school, radar controller school. And somehow the school had not caught up with itself, and there were too many students. So they said, "We need a couple of volunteers to sit back for 2 weeks before you start school." You got one here. Well, 2 weeks later, the same thing. And the third class started. This time the guy looks at me and says, "Vandergriff, this time you're going to school." Because I was living down on Mexico Beach and having a blast. Anyway, they got assignment for me to go back to Malmstrom as a radar controller. I'm going to be controlling the guys that I was flying with. Oh, that didn't sit well at all. I said, "Isn't there anything you can do about that?" And they says, "You want to talk to Air Force personnel? Be our guest." So I had a couple of martinis and called Air Force personnel at San Antonio and explained the situation to him. I said, "You can't expect a guy to go back and direct the people that he was used to fly with." I said, "That's cruel and inhumane." He said, "Well, how does LA sound to you?" I said, "The only LA I know is California." They said, "That's the one." I said, "Put me down, I'll go." So the next assignment was Norton Air Force Base, San Bernardino. And it was a SAGE system. There you go, what, ground environments surveillance?
Simulated, I think simulated air ground environment, wasn't it?
Something like that.
Something like that.
Anyway, the big blockhouse.
Yeah, big blockhouse.
And they made me a weapons director. And after I got into it, it was kind of fun. I remember several exercises we had out there, joint Navy, Marine, and Air Force exercises, joint services. And one of our prime duties was to keep the pilot informed of how far he was from his home station so he could have enough fuel to recover. I had a flight of Navy birds. And I said, told them what their pitches were, pitches being the distance. "Oh, we'll press on." I was starting to do a little sweat, and he got downright worried because I said, by my calculations, you don't have enough fuel to get back. I said, "Oh man, we got a carrier right down here below us." Thanks a lot for telling me, you know.
Were you able to get any airtime in during this period?
Yeah, I was flying T-birds, T-33s. And then I got orders to go to Shemya, Alaska. And I asked my weapons tech, I said, "You're here of Shemya, Alaska?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I got an assignment there." And he fell off the dais, laughing, just rolling. He said, "Man, it could have happened to a nicer guy." And we went out there on C-124s, old Shakies, 4-engine Globemaster. And the only way to describe Shemya, it was gray. Everything was gray. The weather, the buildings, the atmosphere, the mood, everybody's mood was just gray, just blah. And I got up there and found out I was the ranking captain. So I was made a detachment commander. And at that time we were part of AFJOG, which was Army Air Force Joint Operations Group. It was a security service. They did the listening and we did the painting with the radar. Of course, we were right at the end of the illusion, so it was a surveillance spy
Sure.
mission. Then ADC decided they were going to make it a surveillance site for their purposes. So we became Detachment 2 of the 9th Aerospace Defense Division. We were back in the true Air Force again. Life up there was just no fun at all. It was, like I say, gray and miserable.
And that was a, a remote assignment. You didn't take family with you? It was
No
just, yeah.
family. No women of any kind. Reeves Aleutian Airlines used to fly in there, and they'd have a couple of stewardesses on board that they couldn't get a job anyplace else. And my co-captains that I was a commander kept complaining about Andy always had this broad in his room. It was bad for morale. So I talked to Andy about it. And next time they came in, Roger came over again, he says, Andy's at it again. I said, how do you know? And Roger takes his water glass, puts it up, here? Can you hear him?
How long were you up there?
A year.
Well, felt like 10.
Sure did.
Huh.
And I skipping ahead a bit. When I came back, I came down to Int here in Colorado Springs. And it was part of a Stanival group. And we went back up there, and the detachment just did horrible. They just completely busted everything. So my commander called Loretta and said, pack me a bag. And then he called me, he says, I've already talked to your wife. Your bag is on the way, you're the new commander. I said, I've been the commander up here. And he says, you're the new commander. And I said, well, I had to fire the ops officer too. And he said, and you're the new ops officer. So I'm the only poor son of a bitch in the world that ever had be commander shim you twice. Anyway, we came back down to Colorado Springs, and the new outfit was called 2nd Surveillance Squadron. And I was one of the staff officers. Ben Parker was our commander. And a story about Ben. He and I went out to Los Angeles, and we went to the Hollywood what was the name of the big hotel out there? Hilton?
Beverly Hills?
Beverly Hills Hilton. And he said, come on, I'll buy you a drink. So I ordered a drink, and he ordered a Chivas Regal and Coke. Bartender would serve it to him. He said, you don't mix that grade of scotch with Coke. Well, Ben had fought World War II in the South Pacific. The only scotch they could get was Chivas Regal, premium stuff. And the only soft drink they could get was Coca-Cola. He said he acquired a taste for it, but that's it.